Hey, everybody, welcome to the Aligned Love Podcast. This is the place where I am going to help you find the one thing that you feel is missing: healthy love. I am your host, Lauren Zoller, and in this podcast, I will share with you how to attract love, live in alignment, and elevate your deepest relationships. So buckle up, get present, tune into your body, and open up to the possibility that you truly do get to have it all. Let's dive in. Good. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's been a while.
I know. And I knew that we had to do this because when the Balanced Boss podcast was alive back years and years ago, it feels like another version of Christin and Lauren that were on the Balanced Boss podcast. Our episode, the one where I spoke to you, out of all of the episodes, we had Mastin Kipp, we had Danielle Lepore, we had Kathy Heller, we had like big hitters on the podcast. Yeah. Our conversation was the most listened to, and probably for a good reason, because you're my other half. So I'm bringing you back.
Agree. Yeah, I found the same thing to be true when I was recording Nothing Confidential, which that also feels like another lifetime ago. And there's always like a will they, won't they with that. Is it going to come back? Is it not? Have no idea about that. But I did notice that all of the conversations I had with my friends, with the people who were really close to me, people I know really well, people who knew me really well, those were the ones that got the most downloads. And I remember having Lindsay and Krista from Almost 30 on there, and like a bunch, I had a bunch of guests with huge podcasts with tons of downloads. And the most were like me and my friend May talking about hemorrhoids, and me and you talking about our dating, escapades and all of that. So I really do think that intimacy lends itself to the on-air chemistry for sure. But, people also just want to feel like they're in the presence of really like high quality connection. So happy to be back. Happy to be with you. Happy to be taking on this new journey and this new kind of direction for your podcast. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. And we're, to be fully transparent, I come to podcast recordings with questions ready to roll. And Kristen and I, it is New Year's Day. I'm pretty sure we're both a little hungover.
I'm hungover as hell.
And actually, I was an adult last night and I had tacos and we drank wine, and I did go to bed by 2, but I only had 1 glass of wine. So I'm proud of myself. However, I am still feeling a little shaky from the holidays, but I have no questions. We are just going to do this off the cuff, but we do know that we want to talk about our relationship. And when I mean our relationship, I mean me and Kristen, because she truly, we laugh and say that, yeah, like I have Sean, you have Mike, but really, it's us. We have each other.
The real love story that spans all of time is the love between us. Yes.
Yeah. And so we're going to talk about female friendships today. And I'm sure that it's going to, we're also going to talk about sex and relationships and everything, because it's just so intertwined. So I think that we should kick it off with how we met.
Oh my goodness.
Let's go way back and talk about how we met.
Back. Okay. Well, from my side of the fence, Mike and I had come back from traveling the first time around. We had moved to France for several months in 2014, came back in 15, lived with a friend in the basement, which was like a hilarious situation. She was pregnant with her first child. There's a lot going on. But while we each kind of got jobs and got back on the grid and got situated, it took us a few months to find a new place to live. And when we did, it was this condo in South Nashville, and it was our landlady, who will remain nameless. And she was an interesting character, but she did say to me very randomly one day, she's like, I take this girl's yoga class and she is just amazing. And I think she is so cool. And I just think you guys would hit it off. I don't know why, but it's just an intuitive thing. Just think you guys would hit it off. And I'm like, okay, lady who doesn't know me and also kind of turned out to be a horrible person. However, she did put me in touch with you. And I don't remember if it was like that she might have connected us via text. And then we set up a coffee date. Am I remembering that right?
Yep.
That was our first like, and then we went to
Steadfast.
Steadfast.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Steadfast for a coffee date. And I want to say the rest was history, but I think that the building of where we are now had multiple tiers to it for sure.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's funny because the people that are the most important in my life, I feel, have been introduced to me through someone that kind of knew who I was and knew who they were. But we had a date. We had like a girl date. We went on a first date. And then our relationship has kind of blossomed from there. And we've had ups and downs, like massive ups and downs. We almost broke up. Remember our
Yeah.
breakup?
Like we faced a real epic breakup, and it was one of those really heart-wrenching, like gut twisting ones because it would be the same as being in a romantic relationship and realizing that you had to break up because of basically like an irreconcilable difference, not because you didn't love each other, not because you didn't like each other, but there was like something in the middle that just was insurmountable that you couldn't get over. And that's kind of the situation that we were staring down. And I had no idea what was going to happen. And that was a moment when you really like you fought for the relationship. I think I might have gone into my kind of like avoidance space where I was like, well, we're just going to go ahead and call this a loss and start recovering ourselves. Like we're just going to dust ourselves off and carry on. And you had reached out to me and asked to meet at Steadfast so that we could have a conversation. And I remember Mike asking me, he's like, well, at this point, with everything that had been going on, he's like, is there anything that she could say? And I'm like, I mean, there's only one thing she could say. And I would never expect that of her because so much of your life was tied up in this decision, right? Like for the listeners, this is like very vague, but essentially there was some life stuff happening. Lauren was tied up with someone in business, and me and that business partner had come head to head, and I had decided that I couldn't be involved and I couldn't have that person in my life. And you were so intertwined and mixed in, had so much invested. I was like, I couldn't even expect you to give that up or to withdraw from that situation. Like you were in too deep, but I just knew that I couldn't have that in my life. And that meant losing you potentially. And so I was like, yeah, I wouldn't even expect her to do that. And I remember it was raining. It was like super dramatic. It was like,
We
it's like
we
a
met
scene.
for matcha. I hate matcha. I
Yeah.
hate matcha. But I drank it for you. I remember I was like, this is I love her so much. This is disgusting. I'm gonna vomit. I still love it.
We have matcha, we have damp hair, we're sitting there. It's like a very solemn atmosphere. And then basically you were like, well, I'm blowing up my life and I choose you. I choose the friendship, I choose this relationship, and everything else is going away. And I think I was really shocked by that. Like I don't know that I've ever had a friend make a sacrifice like that before, right? Like when you grow up and you have friends as kids, and a lot of us come into adulthood with friends. I didn't. I made most of my lifelong friends in my 20s. Like once I got to Nashville, most of the ones from my childhood, they didn't survive the stages of evolution. And I had never had somebody who wasn't a friend that started as like circumstantial or geographical kind of convenience, right? It's like you fall into friendship and it's very easy. And I think this was the first time that somebody fought for me, like that that was ever a thing. And that was huge. That had a huge impact on me and my life. And I think the trajectory of our friendship.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that too. I'll never forget that day. And I feel like that really set the tone for our relationship and how when you just said that I I fought, right? Like I fought for that relationship. And I think that that's something that's not really spoken about in female friendships a lot because what I love so much about our relationship is that we're so intentional about that piece. Like you and I fight for each other for everything. Like it's going to make me teary-eyed. Um for everything that we do. Like even in and I just recorded, I was telling you about this before we started, but I just for everyone that's listening, listen to the podcast episode with Sean and I because I praise Kristen. I talk about how Christin has been two different things for me, especially in my dating journey. She is the best friend that has flat out told me that Amanda's garbage and has probably told him to his face that he's garbage. That happened on several accounts. But on the other side, she also recognizes a healthy partnership and has been Sean and I's biggest cheerleader, not just like when we get in arguments, she's just not team Lauren. She's team Lauren and Sean in the relationship. And I think that's something that I kind of want to talk about and highlight, because I feel like you and I are both that way. Even when you call me, I'm like, okay, well, I'm not just team Christin. I'm going to be team Christin and Mike, because I know how much work we've put into having really healthy partnerships. And so I kind of want to talk about that piece. I want to talk about when you're in a female relationship and you're also dating out in the world of dating, or you're in a relationship with a significant other, how do you keep that dynamic of being like, because you were always my litmus test. It's like when I couldn't trust my own gut, or I knew I could trust my gut, but I needed somebody else to validate it. I knew that I could go to you and you would be that sounding board to help. So I don't know, there's probably not a question in there, but I just want to kind of throw that ball in your court, see what you take from that.
Yeah. Well, I do want to just quickly clarify for everybody listening. Lauren keeps saying female friendships, but what we really are talking about is friendship, like platonic, intimate friendship, and non-sexual intimate relationship is what we're talking about, because those are so important in our lives. And I think that we do know now more than ever that a romantic relationship is not designed to meet all of our needs, and that the amount of intimacy and support and connection a person requires to be healthy and vibrant and, fully expressed, that really is a group effort. That's a community effort. Like, we are meant to have other people besides our romantic sexual partner who are able to meet needs for us, who are able to be a sounding board and a confidant and someone that we process with and someone that we have fun with. And each relationship that we have brings out a different facet of us. And this podcast is all about aligned love, and there's so many different types of love, and we have such a deep, nourishing love, and it is a growth edge, and has been a growth edge, to learn how to kind of give each type of relationship and each type of love in our lives the respect and the space that they deserve, and then also build congruence between them. And so, it's really typical. I'm a huge like rom-com romance, like reader, writer, and there's always the spunky best friend, right? But often what a writer is doing to build tension in a plot line is there's tension between the romantic interest and the best friend. And often that comes from jealousy or insecurity, or, lots of things like that, where there is this idea that there isn't enough love to go around. And it's like, if my best friend finally meets someone, they're going to get like taken away, right? Like, there's going to be less love for me if there's this kind of love in their life now. And I don't think that's something that people say out loud very often. I don't think most people, especially because there is some judgment around that, probably self-judgment, where it's like, well, what kind of person am I if I can't be happy for my best friend who's been looking for love, finally found it, and I'm thinking about me and like what that's going to mean for me. But I think that's human. And I do think that because love is a resource, love is life for us. Like, love is so much of where our nourishment comes from, that when that supply, our perceived supply of love, is threatened, so to speak, I think it's normal to have a reaction to that. But the growth piece, and this is something I've been really aware of in my own life for the last couple of years, is this expansive idea of love, where when the love is healthy and the love is mutual and reciprocal and flexible and all of these things, it just brings so much more, and the more there is, the better, right? And so, that includes being open to the different types of love that come into our lives. And this is huge in friendship, because think about being, for me, I think about being a little girl, and the worst number ever is three, right? It's like there's the triangle, and well, she's my best friend, but maybe I'm her best friend, but then they're not best friends. But then there's like all of this friction, kind of like, who's the best friend, who is the most important, what is that like there wasn't this sense of, you can have as many best friends as you want, like you can have as many close and intimate friends as you want, and each of those people offer you something different and something unique and something irreplaceable, and they don't have to challenge or threaten each other. They can all coexist together. That's not a concept that I learned until I was a grown ass woman.
Yeah.
Like I have four best friends, soulmates, like all of us out here. And then of course there's varying intimate rings. There's like lifelong friends, and there's mom friends, and there's all these different categories. And they're all so important, and they're all vital, and they don't cancel each other out. Like my best friendship with Kristen does not threaten my best friendship with you and Nicole, and vice versa. You have other really close friends who bring so much value to your life. And I don't know a lot of them or have a relationship with them, but I value them for the value and the love that they bring to you. And the same is true of healthy partnership. Like I know that Mike and I we were a package deal. We were together when we met. That's how long it's been. Mike and I have been together a decade, and I think you and I are maybe like eight years or something like that. Yeah. So, Mike and I were already together, but our relationship has evolved so much since you and I have been friends. And that was something I think that you tuned into right away, was that mine and Mike's relationship was healthy. And so you became pro our relationship pretty much from day one. And what that means is that you actually built a friendship with Mike that can stand on its own, that is separate from your relationship and friendship with me, and even our friendship as, a couple, and you as a throuple together. You guys have your own stuff, which I think is awesome. And I love that. And you know him, like you were open to knowing him so that you could speak to who he really is also. Because in friendship, that's one of the greatest gifts we have, is being able to like see that person and call to the truest version of them.
Yeah.
And you were able to do that for my partner, which is huge, because when I call you and I'm like, hey, I just need to vent, I'm like going to go off, and you're going to know right away. You're like, so totally hear you, totally love you. Also, this is like what you do, and I don't think Mike did anything wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's a really vulnerable place to be. It's a vulnerable place to put yourself. But that is such a high value of mine. And also I know yours, which is like, I don't bitch about Mike to people who don't know him and who are unable to kind of represent that higher side of him as well. Because when we're in conflict, I value my relationship. I want to honor my relationship. And so I want people who are going to be respectful and aren't going to be like, dump his ass. Like we've been together 10 years and have a kid, and we've built a life. We're going to have rough days. And like my go-to strategy is not to dump his ass. So I need someone who understands all of that.
Yeah.
And so then with Sean entering the picture, I am a human, and I remember us having a conversation about it. I just called you and we laughed about it, but I was like, I am having some feels about the readjustment of our rhythm and life to like include him. It's not a bad thing. It's just that for so long, it's been me and you. And now that he's here, it's like, oh, like that eats into my time sometimes. Or, you're busy. You are with someone a lot of the time, and it's not me. And, I'm a human person with feelings. So I got a little jealous. So it's like, oh, like I'm so happy for her, and things
Yes.
are changing, right? And so having to hold space for both of those things, but recognizing and trusting you in choosing someone after all this time and after all the work that you've done, and recognizing that he is a great human being. He has a wonderful heart, and coming in and being open-minded and curious and like getting to know him and not being swift to make judgments and kind of allowing time for me to really get a sense of who he is as a person so that I can do the same for you that you've been doing for me and Mike, which is really speaking to his character and to his person whenever things come up, when there's conflict, when, you know, you just need to get something off your chest. Being able to hold the vision of the whole relationship while listening and supporting, that is huge. And it's really, really valuable, because that whole rule about, you know, you are the 5 friends that you hang out with, or the 5 people, I believe that your intimate relationship is the 5 relationships that you spend a lot of time around, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's so interesting that you said that too, because I know that that was a dynamic that I would, to be fully transparent, I was so nervous. I think I told you I had nightmares before Christin. Okay, well, let's back up, because Sean actually met Mike like
Before me.
before Christin, which is wild to me. But I knew when Sean and I started dating, Mike flew into Nashville for like some weird 24-hour business trip. And I was like, he's got to meet one part of the Hinkies, because I need at least one thumbs up or stamp of approval, because I know that this is going to go quick.
Yeah,
And
we're
I need
moving
somebody
fast.
to
And yeah.
And so he met Mike, and then Mike was like, he's a good dude. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, thank God. But there was still so much. I was so, I was so nervous. I was so nervous. So as you were talking about, for those of you who don't know the dynamics of me and Kristen and Mike and James, it's like their family. I honestly was more nervous to introduce Sean to you guys than my own family. Because you're my person, like you're my other half. And so that was a very real thing, but I also knew how important it was for you to, and I want to say that I just want to give us 2 big gold stars for this, because I feel like we navigated that so beautifully in the way that we were able to kind of like introduce Sean into the mix, because it was hard, just as hard. It's still hard for me. Like, it's hard for me to not talk to you 2 to 3 times a
Yeah.
week on FaceTime and like see James every morning. And so it's a very real thing to navigate. I'm glad we're talking about it, because I don't really think anybody talks about how to navigate friendships into a partnership when it happens, and how important it is that you are friends with your best friend's spouse.
Yeah.
And
Well, we all joke all the time about like passing it's, I think it was How I Met Your Mother is where it started. Maybe it was the front porch test. It's like, do they pass the front porch test? Meaning, when you think about your life 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, who are you in a row of rocking chairs on vacation with? Like, who
yeah,
is there? And do they fit into the family like that we've built? Do they fit into the life that we have built together? And I do think that's something that we we have been messily doing, but with great intention, like imperfectly, but with a lot of intention, has been this introduction of this person who is going to be really important and probably in our lives for the rest of them, for the rest of our lives, for the rest of their entirety. It's like, I don't know how to get that out. But it's so common for rupture to happen in friendships when someone gets into a serious relationship. Everyone knows about that time where the couple just kind of disappears. We like don't see our friend anymore for like a year or something because they're in the honeymoon phase and they're figuring out all these dynamics and figuring out what life looks like. And typically it's just something that goes kind of unacknowledged, and the strongest friendships survive because a lot of us have done that and we remember what it's like. And so there's grace and there's some give there. But it is something that I think we could be more intentional about, which is, how does this person fit into my whole life? And especially, this is something you probably talk about a lot with clients, where maybe you didn't meet your significant other until you were in your mid 30s or 40s. It's different than meeting someone when you're 23. Like Mike and I kind of built adult life together, but you have a fully formed, fully functioning, packed life that you're now integrating someone into, and they're doing the same thing with you. And I think that's been really different. And I think that has its own set of unique challenges that aren't really a thing when you're poor 20 somethings, like just kind of shuffling your secondhand furniture from apartment to apartment and figuring out shit together. Like that, it's a different trajectory.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and to speak to that too, the flip side of that is recognizing, I mean, I've had a lot of friendships die off since Sean and I mean, well, I moved all the way across the country, so that's a big thing. But there's also that piece of deep intentionality with friendships. And, I had a rupture a couple of months ago and I spoke to you about it. And I had a really hard time with it because it was a close rupture with someone who I'd done business with. And the transition from Nashville to Denver was hard for me. You know that. I mean, my whole life, I lived in Nashville for 12 years. It was my whole life. My family lives on the East Coast. It was a big move. I had a cat, right? Like it was, and introducing the cat to the dog was a big thing. So I had picked up my entire life and I had moved. And I recognized in that move that there really were two camps of friends that I had. And one of those camps were my intentional friends like you and Lily and other friends that I have that were allowing me to just show up as I was. Like, this is a big move. There's a lot going on. Your life is like in complete transition. And I never felt judged for that. There was always space held, no matter how messy I showed up. And then the other camp of friends that showed up they were upset. They were upset that I wasn't calling as much. They were upset that I wasn't, being as intentional as I normally was. And so I feel like that is something that's not spoken about too, is when you transition into adulthood, if you do step into a relationship, and really it happens even just outside of just stepping into a relationship, it just happens in life. And I think that I would like to talk about it with you, is this natural knowing that relationships and friendships are going to fall apart. You're going to outgrow them. And that was a really, like, I've outgrown friendships before, but there's something about being in your late 30s, mid to late 30s, or 40s, 50s, that when those relationships start to fade out, I don't know, it hits different. It hits harder. So that's something that I had to deal with too. And so, but I just want to say thank you for being so intentional and letting me be messy through that. Because honestly, like, I would wake up and not know what time it was, what day it was. Like, everything just my whole life felt like it was put in a snow globe and just shook around and flipped upside down.
Yeah. Well, and it does kind of, what it brings up for me when I think about that time is the difference between like just kind of upheaving your entire life this time versus times in the past where like I have always been supportive of you. And that doesn't mean that I haven't been skeptical about some choices or that I agreed with your choices or that, like there was another relationship in the past where there was like a move and it was a temporary one, but it was like and I remember telling you directly, I was like, I love you. I am here for you when whatever happens, happens. This feels nuts, but I love you and I've got you. And I will be here on the other side if this goes the way that I think that it's going to. And I hope that it doesn't. But all of that is true. Right. And like that can be hard. Like I know plenty of people who would take great offense to that.
Mhm.
It would be hard to hear, especially when you are in a space of longing and you're moving towards goal and you're like, look, I'm just trying to listen. I'm trying to listen to myself. Right. And like, I felt like I did really understand that. And like, I don't want you to listen to me over you. And I love you desperately. And I can't not say anything. Right. And like, I would like to, I feel like there have been times where I'm like, yes, she doesn't actually need to hear this from me. Like, I can process this on my own. I don't need to tell her that. But there's been certain times where I felt like, as your friend, as somebody who loves you and is like looking out for you and your well-being, I needed to say something, but it's never like, it's like, I'm going to say what I need to say. And whatever you decide, I am still here for you.
Yeah.
It's not the same as like, I don't agree with what you're doing. And therefore, like, I'm withdrawing from the friendship. Like, that's that. I think there's a difference there. And I think that some people don't know how to navigate like that difference, because it can be really hard to watch someone that you desperately love do something that you're like, I just feel very sure that this is going to end up in pain for them. And it's not our job to rescue people from their lessons. Like,
Right.
it's not. And so something that I think we've really done for each other is strengthen what healthy boundaries look like, you know, and I'm not saying we get it perfect every time. Like, we definitely don't.
Like the
But
salmon story. Remember that? Remember the boundary we had to have for the salmon story?
yeah. There was like a hilarious story that I thought it was very funny, and I kept telling it because it was like a cocktail story. And finally one day Lauren was like, I just need you to stop telling that story. Like, I hate it. I'm not proud of that moment. And I know it's funny, but I don't think it's funny. I need you to stop. And I was like, oh my God, thanks for telling me. And I won't tell it anymore. So the salmon story died after that, but
Maybe we'll tell it. Maybe we'll bring it back to life at some point once,
at some point.
down the line.
But if she had never told me, I mean, that's a couple
Yeah.
different layers of things, right? Like, if you hadn't told me, because you would always just kind of like laugh along with it too, and just be a good sport about it. But like, I didn't know that it was bothering you, and you're like, yeah, I don't like that. Please stop. And I was like, oh my God, thank you for telling me so that I could stop doing that. Like, I didn't realize I was doing that. I wasn't thinking about that. So I think that one thing that we are really good at is having uncomfortable conversations. Like,
Yeah.
we are, I mean, we are like family, we are like sisters. Like, sometimes things are not pretty. Like, there have been times when like you did not like me, and there have been times when I did not like you, but I loved you and you loved me, and the relationship was worth moving through that discomfort. And typically, you know, it was about something that was being triggered for one of us, right, in the behavior. And I think we've really, like a lot of healthy relationships do, we have been able to reflect things back to each other, and behaviors and patterns and wounds from childhood friendships and from early adulthood friendships. And we've been able to kind of heal and resolve and renegotiate some of that stuff together.
Yeah.
So I feel like, I don't know if that answered or talked about what we were talking about.
I just, and I know we're just kind of like going off
We're
the
bouncing
cuff.
around.
We're bouncing around, but I think it is so important. I talk a lot on this podcast about the foundation of building a healthy partnership from a romantic perspective. And truly, everything we've been talking about today is the same thing that you transfer to a friendship. To circle back to what we were speaking about earlier, before Christin met Sean, just to give you a little background, Christin is an 8. If you are an Enneagram follower, Christin is an 8, and so is Sean. And Christin has done a lot of work around her 8-ness, and a lot. And I had this reoccurring nightmare for months that that they met in my presence, and I had to send them both to their rooms. Like, they both had to go to their rooms to take a breather. And it like stressed me out. I was having the same freaking nightmare over and over and over again. And I remember, like, I finally just told you, I'm like, I'm terrified. Like, I'm literally terrified for you guys to meet, because the beautiful thing about 8s is that you two can be in the most heated discussion. And it's like you're high-fiving 5 minutes later. And
Yeah.
me, I'm
When
like,
it's
oh my
over,
God,
it's over. Yeah.
everybody's arguing. The world's going to crumble. Everyone's going to fight and cry. And then I'm going to have to like clean up the mess. And so I start to
I'm
get
gonna have to choose one of you. I'm either gonna have to give up the love I've been waiting for my whole life, or my best friend. It's probably gonna be you, Sean. And like, I just don't.
Exactly. But the reason I'm telling the story is because you were I felt safe enough to be able to come to you and say that. Like, I'm terrified about this. I'm terrified that you two are, because there was an instance when we first started dating. Remember, there was like a Yellowstone. We were talking about Yellowstone, the show. Kristen didn't like
Oh my
it. Sean
goodness.
liked it. It was like a whole thing. It was just a discussion, but I thought that they were going to like bring out their daggers and start stabbing each other, which it was just a healthy 8 discussion. And so you always, even after that Yellowstone discussion, you came to me and you're like, what's going on? Are you okay? And I told you and you laughed and you're like, it's fine. You know, like he's allowed to have his opinion. I'm allowed to have mine. But there was always this 2 things. There was always the acceptance for my wounds and who I am and how, I grew up in a household where everything was swept under the rug and there was a lot of emotional unavailability, and conflict is death. Conflict equals death to me. And so you were able to hold that space and recognize that in me. And then you were also able to diffuse when you did finally meet Sean. There was like this healthy banter. You both were like joking about it and aware. And I think that that is so important because that's what we do in our romantic relationships. It's like you understand your partner's wounds, you understand their triggers, you understand their survival responses, and you're able to give space for the other person to feel comfortable in that. And so I don't know. I think that's really a really important part of friendship that really isn't talked about, that we both have been really intentional about creating in our dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we've also, or I know something I've really personally been working on. I mean, if I'm being honest, since the last presidential election, something that I think I'm not the only one who had a ripple go through a lot of my friendships during that time where, for most people, I don't want to be, broad generalizations, I try to avoid, but like I think a lot of people, at least people I hang out with,
Sean
we
hears that, it's going to be
yeah,
like,
we don't spend our days, talking about politics like most of the time, right? Like we don't talk about it that often, but then these things that are really important that are under the surface all the time come to light during those high pressure times when the news cycle is constant and there's all this stuff going on and division and all of these things. And this a lesson I've been learning is like, how do I continue really loving someone and like not withdrawing from someone because our like beliefs aren't the same, right? And it's an ongoing inquiry that I have, and an ongoing space like that I'm exploring, where it's like, how do I see that person for all of the goodness inside of them and love them and connect with those parts even when some of our values aren't aligned, right? And like the misalignment of values, I think does dictate, it dictates closeness, it dictates the quantity, like the amount of time spent and kind of the depth that you're able to go to, because there are some friendships where it's like, I love you desperately. I think you're a wonderful person. And if we go too deep, there's like too many little bombs that could be set off, that could be detonated. So we kind of have to stay a little bit more surface. And it's just kind of understanding these different degrees of relationship. And I do think that some of that stuff was preparing me and helpful, like in this situation, right? It's like when your person picks a partner, you're like, okay, I see all the things I love about this person. And also, like, there are several things that we are never going to agree on. We should probably not bring up over dinner. We should definitely not talk about when we're drinking or on vacation. And like letting all of that be okay. Like,
yeah,
not, and I think that is something that's hard for 8s. We're challengers and we pursue safety through control. We're like, I want to control my environment so that I know that nothing's going to happen. Nothing's going to go down without my consent because I am kind of facilitating everything. And so when get with another person who's like that, but you don't have everything in common, that can be very dicey.
yeah,
And so I think it's really a growth opportunity. And also it is about trust. Like you are a smart, brilliant, grown person who has been through so many types of relationships and so many iterations of evolution. And if your heart chose this person, then like, who am I to say that they're not the right person, or that they're, like, just because it doesn't always make perfect sense doesn't mean that it's wrong and that it's not the right thing, and I think there are plenty of people who would say that, like, about me and Mike, where I've known people who know me and they don't know him, and they're like, I can't even picture the kind of person like that you would be with, like a life partner, like who lives with you and deals with you on a daily basis. Like, who is that? I think people are like, wow, we can't imagine what kind of person that is. And then they meet Mike and they're like, oh, he's not what I expected. And also he's exactly who I couldn't imagine anyone else doing
Yeah.
that. And so I think something Mike and I've talked about in private has been how, like, Sean is so different than I think what a lot of us expected, but in the best way. Like, there's things that he brings out in you and things that he stimulates in you and things that, he brings out that another personality wouldn't, that another, and I think in a healthy way. Like, he gives you access to parts of you that have been hard for you to access. And it's like clunky and uncomfortable. And you can kind of feel that tension sometimes. But at the same time, I think it's making you a happier, more open, more present, more soft person. And that is what, like, love does. It does that for us. First, it makes us uncomfortable, it cracks us open, and then it like puts us back together. And it does seem like, that's happening. And you guys are very complementary, very different and very complementary. And I think that Mike and I are also like that. So it is interesting to welcome a partner in who you're like, I was not expecting you, and I'm still figuring out what to do with you. But also, I think you might be the greatest thing that happened, right? That ever happened, right?
Yeah. So that'll be our next podcast episode where we talk about the unveiling of that, because it's so true. And it's funny because you and I joked about it when I first started dating Sean, because Mike and I are very similar. And that, I don't know, if you meet Mike, Mike and I talk about plants. Like, we love plants and talk about very calm things, and you and Sean are very similar in a lot of ways. Again, totally different values. And I think what you said is so important, that, and Sean would back me up on this too, that underneath, even though you can be so different than your significant other's partner, they both you and Sean lead with love. Like, love is always what's being brought to the table first. And you guys have had some pretty intense discussions, but at the end, love has always been kind of I don't know, it's anchoring it. Believe me, Sean is very opinionated and very strong in his beliefs and the way that he speaks out into the world. But he does always lead with love. And I feel like you're that way too. And it's just really important to remember that, regardless of who your friend is in partnership with, like, if you can really let that be your foundation, you can navigate anything from that space if you truly allow love to be the foundation.
And mine and Sean's running joke is like, are you surprised that I agree with you? It's like every now and then, just to throw shit off, we'll like agree with each other and then be like, whoa.
Whoa, crazy. It does happen. It does happen every now and then.
It does happen.
Every
We
now
like
and
a lot of the same movies, guys. We like a lot. We both love California Christmas. So it's, there's
I do feel
potential.
like being in relationship with you prepared me to be in relationship with Sean.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
So it's like it's so funny in a lot of
Well,
ways.
and I think that's something that we should talk about, because this has come up in my reflection of like past friendships, especially like childhood, like middle school and even high school friendships, which is where I think I operated from a place of like knowing who I am and what I want. Like, that's been part of who my identity since I was born. I've always known who I am and what I want. And when you operate like that, if everyone else in the room isn't doing that, it can be really easy to kind of like to bulldoze, like with, and I was very unconscious in that. Like I was not sensitive to the fact that everyone wasn't operating from the same place as me. And so there were a lot of people who had thoughts or opinions or wants or wonderings, and my kind of like, this is where we're going energy and stance didn't leave a lot of room for that. And they didn't feel safe enough, and we didn't have the relationship. There wasn't the circumstances to kind of support them being able to say that stuff. And and that's not all on me, obviously, but I think something that our friendship has really made me aware of is, slowing down and taking space for people who communicate and show up and emote like differently than me. Because I think for a really long time, I'm just assuming that if someone has a problem, they're just going to say something, because that's what I would do. If I see something, I'm just going to call it out. So if you haven't said anything, I'm assuming everything is hunky dory and I'm just plowing right ahead. And I think our friendship is really the space where I had to like slow down and start noticing. I'm like, oh, she definitely has something to say. She's just not saying it. And why? Why are you not saying it? Oh, because I feel like I can't. Oh, because I feel like your response is going to be really strong. Or because I feel like you're going to get angry, or you're going to, it doesn't feel like it's okay. You say, tell me what's going on, but it feels like if I do, there might be consequences. And that was something I wasn't aware of in myself. I wasn't aware that how I presented could potentially affect someone in that way, making them feel like there wasn't room for them to say what was going on with them. And that was like a really big deal. Like I can't imagine how many friends I've had who were quiet or non-confrontational, and they just kind of went along with stuff and then resented me because I was running the show. But I didn't know that they had input. I didn't know that they wanted it to be different than that. I just assumed that everything was fine because no one was saying anything.
Yeah. Well, and on the flip side of that, that's really helped me step into using my voice, because prior to our relationship, I never felt safe enough to do that. Right. And so, and Sean's very much the same way. He doesn't understand why it takes me time to use my voice and say something when something isn't right, because I usually sit back, I reflect about it, and then I'll speak forward. But what it has done now in my partnership with Sean is that it has allowed me to use my voice more frequently, because I know, wait a second, right? Like, this doesn't mean that he's going to pack his bags and leave and everything's going to be like, our relationship's going to end. Just like if I use my voice with you, you're not going to not be my friend and give me the cold shoulder and never talk to me again. So I feel like understanding that dynamic between both of us has helped honestly, in our current romantic relationships too.
Yeah. And it just, all of this conversation just makes me think about how, like, we truly in our society, I think we have such a limited idea of what love is and what even being in love is. Like everyone gets very tied up in like romantic love and sexual connection, but like I am desperately in love with you. Like I always have been, and it's like mutual. Our relationship has never been sexual. And yet, like, I am in love with you. I am in love with like all of my closest friends. Like, we are actively in love, like that. And people just don't think about that. And that's another piece of why like friend breakups are so deeply painful, because it's the same, just without that physical component. It's like the only thing separating it is that we aren't having sex.
Yeah.
But like everything else is the same. We're building a life together. We're revealing our innermost souls to each other. We are trusting each other with a lot. And when someone decides to walk away from that, it's incredibly painful. And I think that we don't actually give enough honor to like deep friendship. We don't honor it the same way that we do partnership, but like this is a partnership. We are doing life together. Lauren is the third parent of our child. She is the third spouse in our marriage. Like we are,
Yeah.
we're going to wrap Sean in and he could be the fourth one, but it's like, we are, I think people, who practice polyamory, they've got it right in a lot of places. And like whether people actually they may not identify with that as a form of sexual expression. It might not feel right for them, and that all of that's okay. But I think that, you know, hetero couples and partnering dynamics could learn a lot from the way that polyamorous individuals like do family and do relationships, and do, like they are prioritizing and honoring love in multiple, you know,
Facets.
yeah, facets, kind of with the same that you
Intent.
would
Yeah.
your individual, like your individual relationship, your singular relationship, right? And I think that we need to do that more.
Yeah. Well, we've always said that we want to live on a commune and,
Yeah.
raise our babies and
God, I can't tell you how many times your mom has just been like, God, wouldn't it just be easier if y'all were gay? Like, wouldn't that just be easier? Lauren, wouldn't it, if you and Kristen, then you could just be together? And I'm like, we are together. Like, we don't actually have to be gay. Like, we are
we are
together.
together. We just need to get closer in
It's,
vicinity. Like I
yes,
need to be able to come over and get eggs,
I know.
you
I would
know?
like to come into my kitchen and you be drinking coffee at my counter already when I get there to get coffee. Like, that's my dream. That's my actual fantasy.
So my dream too. It's going to happen. Well, and this is a whole nother, we have to wrap it up because we could talk for hours and hours, but we learn about that. We learn about this a lot in our trauma training, that the importance of community and the importance of connection within community, and how there's so much trauma around being like, I love Sean with my whole heart and soul. If it was just Sean and I, we would kill each other. Like there's so much that I love about him, but there's so much that he cannot fulfill within me. And I think it's really important to remember the importance of community and the importance of love within community. And I think, to just wrap it all in a big fat bow, that's what we're talking about today, is that you have to nurture your relationships, all of them, not just your romantic relationship. You also have to nurture the other relationships that are important to you and invest just as much time and energy into them. Because if you don't have community, it's going to get dicey. It's going to feel really isolating. And so I'm just
Well,
really,
and I want to pull the thread through to wrap around your bow from before when you were talking about leading with love, and no matter how those conversations go or what you're talking about or how hard they are, like letting love be the base, the anchor of those conversations, because that's the only way that we've navigated all the petty shit that like tears relationships apart in your early 20s. Like 20 to 30 is a huge developmental jump, and lots of relationships don't make it out of there. Lots of couples who get together romantically in their early 20s don't make that transition, because we're different people than who we were like when we are 20 versus 35. Like, we are different people. And the thing that kept us together are all those conversations about any like big stuff and little stuff. I always talk about, and it's not because it's a big deal, but it's because what it represents. I talk about how I had to unfollow Lauren on Instagram during a period. There was like a chapter in our life where I was like, I just can't look at your six pack while you're doing handstands right now. Like, I love you. I want to talk to you every day, like I always do, but I'm just going to like silence your Instagram, because like that is not great for my mental health and where I'm at with my journey. But it's like, you normally can't say that,
yeah,
or won't, or people won't. But I was able to separate, and we've both done that for different things, you know. It's like, I support you and I don't have to look at that. I get the real you. So I don't have to participate with this like online version and iteration that you're in right now. Like, I know who you are and I love you and I want to be with you, but I need to pause this part or this thing. And I think that that gave me the space to kind of deal with my own stuff that was being stimulated through that, and like heal through that. And like, it's a non-issue now. Like, I can't even, I laugh when I think about it. I'm like, that was hilarious to me but it was, at the time, it was so stimulating because of so much of my other stuff that I had going on, that I just couldn't handle it. But it's like, a lot of people would ghost, or they'd be like, I can't like be around this right now. And so they would make it about that person instead of what was being stimulated, and it would end the relationship. And then years later, when you've addressed the thing that was your thing to begin with, you realize that like you let go of somebody who's really important because you couldn't separate them from what they stimulate for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think the love piece, like being able to say things with love, being able to separate that and really say, like, I am telling you, this is not about you. This is me taking responsibility for where I'm at. This is something I need. I still love you. I'm not severing our connection. Like, I'm actually taking steps to be able to stay in connection with you.
So big. So big. I mean, we could do a whole podcast episode on just that, because
Yeah.
that's leading with love. I mean, that in and of itself right there, which leads me to the very last question that I want, but I think you just answered it. I always ask everybody, what does aligned love mean to you? I think that you just gave us the answer, but is there anything that you want to add to that? Because I mean, truly, I ask everybody on the show. I think we kind of spoke about all of it in a big fat nutshell within this entire conversation, but anything you want to add?
I mean, aligned love to me is safety. Like it is safe. It's safe to speak your truth. It's safe to ask for your needs. It's safe to fully express and be honestly who you are. It's safe to hate Yellowstone if you hate it. It's safe to love Yellowstone if you love it. You're safe within that space with that person. Like that's what alignment and safety go hand in hand for me. Like if you feel typically the feeling of misalignment is the same feeling of threat or discomfort or dis-ease or things that kind of indicate to you that you don't feel completely safe. So those things are in really close relationship with one another.
Well, I am so grateful to be in aligned love with you.
Back at you, babe.
And thank you for coming and having this conversation. I feel like people are going to be like, can you guys just start your own podcast? Which
Maybe
we've thought about it.
Tempt us with a good time. Oh my God. Do you want to hear a podcast idea I actually had?
Yes.
I was thinking about this today. I was like, I'm going to go totally the opposite direction of what I did before. It's not really here to help anyone. It's purely for entertainment. I want to take all of the smutty romances that I read and like make Mike actually do the sex scenes with me to see how like feasible they are, and then like rate them on actual enjoyment versus like we're writing them to be hot, but like when you really do, is it actually hot? And then like give our reviews.
So good. It has to happen. So stay tuned, because the next episode of the Aligned Love podcast is going to be the announcement of Kristin's
Exactly.
sexcapade. It just needs to be called a sexcapade. I don't know. It needs to be called. We'll have to work on that title. I love you so much. Thank you so much.
I love you.
And we're probably going to do this, I don't know, like once a month or something, just because I need to.
I would love to be your unofficial co-host.
Perfect. That wraps up today's episode of the Aligned Love podcast. One thing that would really help me and the other new potential listeners is for you to rate this show and leave a comment wherever you tune in and listen. Also, make sure to link up with me on Instagram at Lauren Zoller, and please share this podcast with anyone who you think may enjoy it. Until next episode, remember, every transformation begins with one moment of awareness, and I hope today has been yours. I'll see you next time.